Thank you, and thank you, Anu, for this. Given the timing, I'm going to skip any further introductions. If you'd like to learn more about these wonderful panelists, you can Google them and find out more. But what we'd like to do is start off having them each spend a few minutes explaining what they have been doing. The title of this panel is Sustainable Solutions. There are a lot of wonderful ideas that are out there. You've heard some today. Now you're going to hear some more. And I'd like to just highlight that, as Bernie said, it does take collaboration, that each of these initiatives that you're going to be hearing about involves more than one organization and more than one campus. And then I will be monitoring the chat, and I would be glad to, I have some questions, and I also would be very glad to pose your questions to the panelists. So without further ado, Miriam, would you like to start off and tell us a little bit about your work in this space?
Sure. First, of course, thank you to Rutgers Global and to Rick and Anu for your leadership and for this excellent conference with all the outstanding speakers we've already heard from. So I really want to appreciate all the panelists and the participants. So this section is focused on, so how do we move forward? What actions can we concretely take? And I think take that are inclusive, equitable, and durable. So let me start with actually a concrete way for college and university leaders to actively demonstrate their engagement and commitment. And that is, we haven't announced this publicly at all. We'll be launching it this coming week, is the President's Alliance is launching a type of call to action that we are calling it a statement of support for students and scholars fleeing from violence and conflict. And this is for institutional and organizational leaders to sign on. I just put the link in the chat. You're the first group who are seeing this. And as you know, Rosanna Kim and Adam Hunter early on this morning commended the engagement of higher education and of institutions and of organizations. And we really need to continue that momentum and mobilization. So this administration has been doing some really good policy changes and improvements, and there's so much more to do in order for higher education to meet this moment. We've got to continue to inform our campuses, as we're doing now, about what the issues are, how we can organize and mobilize. This statement of support both commends what's happening and urges continuing change. So let me say a little bit about the two concrete policy asks that we have, kind of policy focus that we put in this statement. And let me start with university sponsorship of refugee students and why that will be such a game changer for refugee students and campuses, because it'll enable higher education to be a proactive and effective resettlement pathway for refugee students seeking safety in higher education. So this is a little bit, so this is part of what the President's Alliance, which focuses on support for undocumented international and refugee students and bringing together campuses and leaders and impacted populations and experts on the immigration issues that impact their campuses, that impact students and campuses in higher education. We started focusing last spring, on private sponsorship because the Biden administration announced last February that they were going to launch private sponsorship initiatives. And right away, the President's Alliance and our partners seized this opportunity to recommend that private sponsorship pilots should include that universities be able to sponsor refugee students coming from abroad, both to study in the US and achieve permanent residency. Last May, the President's Alliance, along with many organizational and institutional partners, many of whom have today been speakers or participants in this conference, launched an initiative to significantly increase refugee student access and entry in the US, and specifically to develop the policy and programmatic framework for a university sponsorship program in the US, which does not yet exist here, and also to make recommendations to improve the existing F1 student pathways to support refugee students and other ways to support displaced students already in the US. I'll just say the initiative was led by the President's Alliance, UNHCR, the Global Task Force on Third Country Education Pathways, the University Alliance for Refugee and At-Risk Migrants, along with the Student Voices for Refugees Network. The entire planning process took a little over 6 months, and last November, we issued our recommendations. In December, we launched the public campaign, along with a representative from UNHCR and from the State Department, from PRM, and participants included refugee students, alumni, college, universities, and many policy, education, and humanitarian resettlement experts. We're really excited about this, and I think my colleague Laura can put the full report and toolkit that we also shared a little bit early on if you want to learn more about it. As Rosanna says, and she was tantalizing, kind of saying earlier today, it's shortly forthcoming, some announcements about private sponsorship. We are waiting for that. We think there'll be a notice of funding opportunity, and this will really be an opportunity to develop university sponsorship. And that's one of the reasons for the statement of support is let's show how much higher education is committed to that. But there's also other kinds of policy advocacy. And let me just spend 1 minute, Dan, if I can, just to say that we also need to ensure that the F1 visa system, and as much as way possible, the F1 visa can support refugee students who are seeking to come to the US. There's already been some changes, but there's more that can be done. And also to support special student relief and TPS for those displaced students and scholars already in the US. So I was greatly heartened to hear from Adam Hunter from DHS saying it's pretty automatic now. So if there's going to be TPS, then we'll also announce SSR for that country. That's great to hear. There's still more things that we can do to clarify the processes, to expedite the processes for those impacted students and scholars, and we want to do that. And I'll just end with one thing, which is, and I think this was brought up earlier on in the conference as well, is that we also have to work, both private and public institutions in the US, on ensuring that there is some access to in-state tuition and financial aid for recently arrived refugees and for humanitarian parolees. And so there are ways that we can support those efforts on the state level. There's also going to be a reintroduction of the Torch Act, which is to offer refugees college help, that Representative Huffman from California will reintroduce. And those kinds of, both at the federal level and the state level, to help make college accessible and affordable to humanitarian parolees, refugees, asylees, are very important as well. So that's part of the work that we're doing, and the statement of support is now a concrete way for your president or chancellor to sign on. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Miriam. I appreciate it. Heather, could you tell us a little bit about what NAFSA and you are doing?
Sure. Thank you so much. Now, it's always hard to follow Miriam. She is so good at setting out what she's accomplishing. And so thank you so much. And thanks for the conference and everybody in attendance. It's wonderful. As we look ahead and look at sustainable solutions, we have to look at where we are right now. And the Immigration Policy Foundation is decrepit. And how do you build a structure that's sustainable and can meet the moment and exceed the moment when the solutions that you provide are built on this decrepit foundation? So for NAFSA, we advocate changes be made in law, in federal policies through the agencies, and to establish a national strategy for international education. And none of these changes can happen without considerable advocacy and pressure from people like you, like all of you and the people on your campuses. To start with, changing immigration law, I don't think it can be overstated how challenging it is to move immigration bills in Congress. Bipartisan agreements aren't shining through the rhetoric. We're not hearing that. But that doesn't change the reality that the immigration system does not work well for international students and scholars. There needs to be changes in the visa issuance policies in the process. There needs to be permanent employment opportunities for international students, and we need predictable processing. I'll drop in the chat, if I can master this, I'm not always great at this, a link to NAPS's most recent. No, it's not working. I apologize. I will follow up with this, I believe. Let's see. Well, this is our national strategy. We'll go with that. I'll follow up with that. Anyway, we have an initial brief on our website that speaks to the current innovation and competitiveness package and the provisions that need to remain in the package as it moves through the Senate. We must first end the requirement that international students applying for F visas, international student visas, prove that they have no intent to remain in the United States. In practice, this means that international students cannot say to a consular official that they're thinking about remaining in the United States after graduation. And this gets even more complicated as we have talked about having more direct paths to green card. There's a concept of dual intent that is in law right now that is available for a few statuses like high-skilled H-1Bs and L intercompany transferees that allows those visa applicants to say that their intent is either to stay or go. They're going to have a life, they're going to come here, and they're going to make choices that are good for them and their families. And so expanding dual intent and getting rid of the non-immigrant requirement. Secondly, we need a direct path to green card for international students. We can discuss about the parameters of that. Is it limited by areas of study? Is it limited by degree level? But we need to move to a point where international students who graduate from US institutions have some expectation that they can get in a path to green card. And that will also mean we'll need to talk about and get rid of the annual and per country caps. Right now, it is very difficult for international students, one, to get an H-1B, to be able to stay here temporarily, and two, if they have an opportunity to remain for a longer period of time to work, to get on a path to green card, that can take years, if not decades. So that process needs to be updated to meet the needs of international students, our campuses, and our communities. It is not working as it is. And that brings us to, what do we need from the federal agencies? We need predictability. We need that built into the law, but we also need that built into the policies. NAFSA has some extensive recommendations on how to do that, but to just briefly cover a few of them, for the Department of State, consular processing, we need predictability. Students and scholars and others fear traveling outside the United States right now because they do not know how long they could be trapped outside if they do need a new visa. People miss funerals, weddings, conferences that are critical to their study and their work because they do not know if they will be able to get a visa appointment to travel back to the United States. We need improvements so researchers and scientists who have critical time-sensitive experiments and research can know that they can depart the United States, that they can have a time frame for security clearances and administrative processing that meets reality. And the State Department should establish a frequent traveler program for visa issuance. This could be modeled after existing DHS trusted traveler programs such as Global Entry. They need to clear the backlog that they have and provide processes that make sense moving forward. For DHS, similar things, but one is improving processing times. They've worked on it, they're improving it, they're staffing up. You might be able to hear my cat meowing in the background. She greatly agrees with this argument, but they need to keep improving and with every confidence that they will, but this builds into the need for predictability. And for example, DHS needs to prioritize items like work authorization, especially for those who have a limited time frame, like international students who have been approved for optional practical training. So they are able to do that and get the work authorization that they need within a period of time that actually makes it possible for them to do that. But ultimately, what we need is a national strategy for international education in the United States. We have a very large federal government that has many different priorities. And we are very lucky that we've been working in coalition and collaboration on this international strategy with the President's Alliance, with Miriam, with groups like ACE and Sarah Spreitzer, who spoke earlier. We're quite fortunate to have such talented people so invested in moving this forward because, and international education policy falls under many different federal agencies, and they're co-equals. So if the Department of State makes a determination that the policy should be to allow entry to the United States through the port of entry in a more streamlined fashion, they can't tell the Department of Homeland Security to do that because they're co-equal. So in establishing an international education policy at a higher level, that's proposed at the administrative level at the White House. So there is someone in leadership who can make determinations for across the federal agencies. We need a mechanism in place to allow for coordination across the sometimes competing interests to ensure leaders remain aligned in seeking to reach the nation's stated international education goals. We've got a good start with the agreement between the Department of Education and the Department of State in their joint statement of principles. And that was done in collaboration with the Department of Homeland Security and others, but that was just in principle. They didn't sign on to it. There's not an agreement in place. So we really need the United States to have a stated international student policy, priorities, and be able to work across the federal agency to move that forward. We are at a critical point. In the last 5-10 years, I feel like we've said that a lot, but this discussion today really shows that we don't have extra time. We don't have extra energy to keep spinning our wheels. We need to not only meet this moment, but exceed this moment. We need to see what we have now and go far beyond. And, it makes me think, I've said this to others, but it makes me think about cell phone technology and how there were people that never had a landline, that when cell phones became available, they skipped over landline, went straight to cell phone. And we need a migration policy, a U.S. international education policy, refugee policy that does that. We need to take a leap. And all of us here and many others are working on it. And I look forward to working with all of you as we move this discussion forward. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Heather. I appreciate that. And Kyle, over to you.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank the folks at Rutgers Global for organizing today's event. And I was just looking at the names that are here throughout the screen, and today's date, that we're in 2022, and I realized that that many of us on this webinar conversation, I think, first started to become acquainted with one another back in 2016, 2017. Around the time that Miriam was working, sort of still the early stages of the President's Alliance. There were some conversations around something that we were starting to call the University Alliance for Refugees and At-Risk Migrants. So in a lot of ways, I'm just sort of having this feeling that today is a continuation of a really exciting series of conversations with a much larger community of been involved in these efforts. Let me just sort of say a few quick words of introduction. I'm Kyle Farnbury. As I think Anu and Rick mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm a former colleague of theirs. I up until December was at Rutgers Newark. I started on January 1st as the president of Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm going to say just a few quick words about some of the entities that I've been involved with over the years that I think thread into this conversation, and then a little bit on just some quick observations based on current role as one who's leading an institution that's been involved with a lot of these questions around what's the role of a higher ed institution in building some long-term partnerships. And then there are just one or two wrap-up thoughts. So as I mentioned, I was involved with the founding of something called the University Alliance for Refugees and At-Risk Migrants. And UARM, as we call it, was founded after, I think, some points of reflection based on the wave of refugees that we saw in 2015. I had just come back actually from doing a Fulbright in Malta, where I'd been looking at issues of refugee migration in the central Mediterranean. And sort of got looped into some conversations that were then taking place. Colleen Teose at the time was at the UN, and as many of you know, then went over to the Open Society Foundations, convened some meetings to just sort of see what higher ed institutions might do. And out of some of those meetings came this thing called the University Alliance. We have worked closely with Miriam and others in terms of looking at issues of policies. Back in 2016 and 2017 and 2018, we did some convening of people that were involved in a lot of the different efforts. A student group that was involved with us launched an effort known as Student Voices for Refugees, and actually, I'm going to put their website in the chat. And one of the key takeaways that I had from just sort of watching the group of students who were involved with Student Voices for Refugees is I think that there are two areas of voices that we need to make sure are part of the work that we're doing. And I think that all of us need to do as much as possible in terms of supporting these voices. Voice set number one are of students. They are the ones who, through university courses or service learning or interactions with different refugees or at-risk migrant groups, are going to develop a passion now that they're going to be able to carry on for the rest of their lives. So as much as we can, sort of engage students now, I think that's critical. And the other is making sure that we have refugee voices themselves, as elevated as possible. One of the criticisms that I know a few of us received early into our gathering of UARRM meetings was that we didn't have enough refugees sort of talking about their experiences. And I'm hoping that that's something that has changed and is changing, that we're finding ways to make sure that the best advocates for refugee higher ed access and partnerships are the best voices are, we all recognize are the refugees themselves. I joined Guilford in January. Part of what attracted me to Guilford was something called Every Campus a Refuge that one of my colleagues here, Dia Abdo, founded now about 7 years ago. Back in 2015, the Pope issued a call that said every parish in the world should work with a refugee family. And Dia sort of took that message back and said, well, what about every college or university? And she went to the then president and said, we have some university housing that's not being used. Could we use that housing to host some refugee families? And I believe that to date, we've now hosted over 60 refugee families. And I'm very excited that ECAR is being replicated across the country. I just saw a school this morning that is opening up its own ECAR. And I think one of the reasons that Dia, I think, is not able to join us today is that she's out spreading the work that she's been doing. We're just over the moon excited about the impact she's been able to have. One of the questions is, I think, what can colleges and universities do? ECAR is an example. There are opportunities for providing scholarships, working with local resettlement agencies, et cetera. I've had a lot of opportunities to sort of reflect on what colleges can do as I've transitioned into this role of president, and particularly transitioning from the perspective of someone who had a lot more time several months ago to really focus on, as someone put it to me, the things that you really want to do versus the things that you have to do. And the things I really loved doing was, being engaged in the work of this community. And but I also realized that as a president, I'm sure many of the presidents who are either on this call or who many of you work with, on any given day, we're dealing with mask questions, we're dealing with questions of immunization, we're dealing with questions of Title IX issues. So there is a bit of a challenge, I think, for folks who are out there advocating to make sure that these issues are on the radars of presidents as much as you possibly can. And constantly asking the questions of how can we be involved, what resources can we leverage, types of resources at different institutions. Luckily, I feel like I'm at a small private liberal arts institution. To a degree, there's some insulation around some of the legislative debates, which in some states are very, very still anti-refugee and are still very anti-immigrant. So there's a little bit of a space to be able to work in that. However, many small liberal arts institutions aren't very well endowed, and we're sort of wrestling with rather small pools of resources that we can tap into. So we kind of have to be a lot more creative. Let me just end with one or two other thoughts. One of the things that I would put out there as an area where I've seen an incredible return on investment is around supporting students who are refugees. And I'm going to give a quick, minute anecdote of a sturdy young woman that I met when I was on my Fulbright in Malta, who was a young refugee leader there. I brought her over to Rutgers to give some talks on refugee higher education access. I spoke with my chancellor at the time shortly thereafter, and I said, this student would make a phenomenal doctoral student. So we were able to cobble together the resources to bring her over. She started a doctoral program last week, defended her dissertation. She's got a few edits to make, but I think by August, we're going to, have a new person with a PhD who's a refugee and can speak very much better than I certainly can to the refugee experience. I saw in the people here, another one of my former students from Rutgers, who I know is also a refugee student doing his doctorate. So as much as we can figure out ways to really support refugee students going forward, then I think that they are going to really be amazing advocates in higher ed to kind of advance some of these different issues. So with that, why don't I end there? And I'm looking forward to just sort of the conversations that we might have.
Thanks very much to all three of you. Really, this is tremendous. I'm going to say just a few words about my involvement in this issue, and then again, I'm keeping one eye on the chat for any questions that you have, understanding that we have a limited amount of time left. So I'm a private immigration lawyer. I'm on the advisory council for the President's Alliance, but basically I work with a lot of colleges and universities, helping them to answer immigration questions. That's what I do. So, and as I completely agree with Heather about what needs to be done. A lot of my day is spent trying to deal with the system the way it is today. And I would encourage you just to not wait for those policy changes. I think the system we have is, I think you said decrepit or broken, or there are a lot of words that we can use for it, but it is what we have at the moment today. And so, and in terms of F1 students, very interesting, back on Christmas Eve, the Biden administration, in part in response to a lot of denials of F1 visas for Afghan students in Pakistan, changed the guidance that goes out to embassies for F1 students. There still is this temporary intent requirement, and as much as I hate to use it, basically we still are in a don't ask, don't tell kind of situation. But the language is much better than it used to be. For example, it says students should not be expected to and do not necessarily have a long range plan, and may legitimately not be able to explain their plans of what they plan to do at the conclusion of their studies. The fact that they may change or even may be likely to change their plans once they are here is not a sufficient reason to deny a visa. So it's not perfect. I just had another Afghan student denied in Pakistan yesterday, but it is better. And I think to the extent that you admit students who don't have, in some ways don't have a lot to go back to from the way a consular officer would look at it, we can still help them explain how to present themselves at consulates. And also, I think this is an example of how even if Congress doesn't act soon on these things, the administration is to a certain extent listening. When this conversation was happening, we were getting emails over the weekend saying, well, what was the old guidance under the Obama administration? And I went to the Wayback Machine on a Saturday night and found the old guidance and sent it in, and a few of those words were used. So let's try. The other interesting model I just wanted to raise, since so many of you are involved in advocacy, is that Last year, the Office of Science and Technology Policy hired a full-time immigration lawyer to think about immigration process because it affects science and technology. And so I think, it's so important to have engagement on these immigration issues with Department of State, Department of Homeland Security. But to the extent that you do have communication with other government agencies or even state governments, and they go to Department of State and Homeland Security and say and ask and talk off the record, that may help amplify your messages. In terms of thinking of sustainability, two other quick thoughts. One is one good way to be sustainable is just to be nimble. I know you all know this because you're working in this space, but you'll be surprised. I think there was the comment earlier that we don't know what we don't know at the moment. I think we've all seen situations where we have a student who has a full scholarship and then realize that student isn't sure how she's going to eat when the dining hall is closed for break. Or just this week, I talked to a student who, again, on full scholarship, room, board, everything, but won an award. And it would have been a $20 bus ticket to go to receive that award in a different city. Couldn't do it, didn't know what to do. So to the extent that you can be nimble, that you can have point people who are interacting with these students, who are problem solvers, who know who to talk to on campus, that's really tremendous. And then access to legal services. It's one way or another, coordinate with your law school, coordinate with a local nonprofit, talk to an immigration lawyer. But these students are hearing all sorts of things from it about immigration, and it's not always true. And I think as a segue I'll turn it over to allow a student to have the last word. I just wanted to share, individual stories are so important for advocacy and just for understanding. And if I could, I'll just share two books that have come out recently. One is, let's see, hold on. One is the story of a refugee who grew up in a refugee camp in Kenya, ended up coming to college here, and a reporter from Foreign Affairs met him. And it's just an incredible explanation of what some people discussed earlier about how incredibly difficult it was just to get information about applying and how much perseverance it took. And then the other one is the story of another F1 student from Burundi who lived through the genocide there, came here, and in his writing classes, he was afraid to tell his story because he thought he would scare the teacher with some of the stories he had, and eventually ended up learning how to interact and sharing his story in a way that was appropriate. So with a few minutes left, Anu and Eric, I'll turn it to you for last words.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much, last panel. To Kyle's point of listening to refugees themselves, we have a few on the line, or I think we do still. Soraya, Sana, Hussein, Mustafa, any of the others, unmute yourself and please give us a few last words of inspiration if you can. Let's see.
Thank you very much, Professor Garfunkel and Rutgers Global, for the opportunity. Thank you very much for the last session. I mean, it was incredible just listening to the stories, just knowing that there are thousands of other refugee students who are having or sharing similar questions and concerns. Yes, it is very important to have access to accurate resources and trust what you hear. And we are so lucky to have the support of educational institutions. I mean, it couldn't be possible in this world to receive support, but receiving a support from an institution is amazing. And but it makes me worried when thinking of like there could be lots of challenges. It's not one, it's not two, but it is time consuming. And but I myself, I have to just stay hopeful for future, because back home there is no path to think about going back home. So thank you very much for thinking of students and scholars at risk, for having this session. And it's a relief for me that there are still institutions and individuals working for students and scholars at risk. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Sana. Thank you very much. Sana arrived about 2 months ago at Rutgers Camden campus, actually, with her husband, Mustafa. Any other comments from any of our refugee colleagues online?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Rick, for letting me know about to join their great conference. So it was my pleasure to listen to all the panelists. It's being a very fantastic and energetic conference I joined. So thank you very much. I saw here, I listened to all the panelists' words that everybody is doing a great job for their parts. I know that as a student, as a refugee, there have been a lot of activity behind the scenes that they are going to support refugee and students. So this is very appreciative from our side as a student. So thank you from Director of African Future Fund for directly involving in our case to providing such supports, and really amazing works are gonna happening for Afghan and also some other refugees like me coming to the US. Thank you very much, President.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock. Oh, Soraya, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Rick. It was wonderful event. Thank you so much for invitation. I learned a lot. I was moved by such a excellent panels and for the discussion. Despite the bad news is around the world we are hearing every day, I was really happy to hear the great opportunities that people like you providing for refugees and for scholars, for students globally. Your efforts are really appreciated, and I'm so happy for the refugees who have such a kind of brilliant supporters around them. They are so lucky, and the world is lucky to have people like you around them. Thank you so much. I really moved, and I'm looking forward for next event to hearing more and see each other again in this beautiful platform of Zoom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Soraya. Soraya is calling in from Germany, and she got out again last minute in late August. Wonderful way to end. Soraya, for those of you who don't know, was International Woman of Courage awardee from the State Department 10 years ago. She's been doing women's support and girl support in Afghanistan for ages. So thank you all for coming today. We will send the recording to all of you who registered as soon as we can. And thank you again, Anu, and all speakers for your participation today.